Bo- Boa noite a todos. É um prazer estarmos aqui participando do 8º Fórum da Política de Segurança Alimentar, do Pacto de Milão. E vamos então para a última sessão do dia de hoje aqui nesta sala, que é
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our session on public policies of food security and health. My name is Valdo Frutuoso, and this is a vision of FIOCRUZ, the Osvaldo Cruz Foundation of Rio de Janeiro. So I'd like to invite you all to take a seat. Professor Denise de Oliveira Silva, researcher and vice director of our regional, and Professor Charles Martins da Silva, researcher at the Osvaldo Cruz Foundation, and Professor Leonardo Esteves de Freitas, also a researcher from the Observatory of Sustainable Territories, Healthy Sustainable Territories of the Bocaina. And they will be then they will be speaking in our closing session. We're going to try to, given the lateness of the hour, we're going to try to have a more concentrated discussion, and we'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation and the partnership in the development of this session, whose title is Public Policies of Food Security and Health, a vision of FIOCRUZ. With no further ado, I'd like to thank Charles Denise for having accepted the invitation, and I'm going to give the floor to Denise, who is going to be our first speaker in this session. Denise, you have the floor.
Boa noite a todos e todas.
Good evening, everyone. It's always very interesting to be an event such as this one. There was an expectation for an exchange, but the whole session was delayed, so we are not able to have this. But this is what for us, is important around FIOCRUZ's vision regarding food security and health. The first issue that seems to be important is when we state that this hegemonic contemporary food system demonstrates a failure in its development. We have worked in different FIOCRUZ units, and given a critical analysis, these corporate contemporary systems have generated wars, social inequalities, and climate problems. And since we are an institution of the health sector, it is quite clear that the consequences of all this will affect health, generally speaking. And in this field where FIOCRUZ works, and the increase of nutritional and food insecurity, we see 33 million people who live in nutritional and food insecurity, presents to us a very important perspective of analysis, given nutritional and food insecurity. And where do we draw the line? I mean, what do we believe is important here? We embrace some perspectives. First of all, we imagine that we can develop as a strategy in the field of health, namely in promoting nutritional and food safety, the development of healthy and sustainable territories. A little of what you're going to hear. Two different experiences that prove to us that this path that communicates with the Agenda 2030 and other international agendas has been an important pillar for the Osvaldo Cruz Foundation. This has been anchored with different institutional actions that are developed in most units. There are 11 units that develop with different characteristics, but all of them working around health. that present a series of important activities in order to ensure health should be developed not under the biomedical classical vision, but of an action in the territory. I think that would be the first lesson learned. And within this, there are some dialogues, certain political dialogues that portray the histories of the territories. The territory is a live being, a live entity with its dynamic, and this has expanded to us and presented us some pointed for us some paths to follow. First of all, that we should act following the science of a citizen, of citizenship. The population that is in that territory should take those problems and solutions important for themselves. So a healthy, sustainable territory exists in this way. Another important pillar that we have learned, given an enormous dilemma that the Brazilian society has lived, is the dissolution. We used to be a country that was considered a model for different international agencies, and today the dissolution of the National Council for Food Security and other agencies show us that we had to take certain measures, namely in the pandemic, which is what we're going to hear now, a series of initiatives that, although FIOCRUZ is not an institution of the executive branch, it was exemplary in its actions in communities that are socially vulnerable. So I think that it's agroecology in health. When we speak about healthy territories, sustainable territories, we are also talking about agroecology as a path that may present what FAO and other international organizations refer to, food systems that are resilient and sustainable. I think that that's just an overview, and I think that my colleagues will be able to present their experiences that will prove how and talk about how FIOCRUZ has dealt with food security. Oh, thank you, Denise. This is okay. Here you can move forward, and thank you, Denise, for your. I think I'm just going to give the floor to Richards. Richards, I'd like to thank you. I counted, we are about 20 people here in this panel. As a teacher, I never believed that quantity is a sign of quality. So I'd like to thank Valber and Denise for the invitation, everybody who is with us now. My speech is going to share an experience by FIOCRUZ with different institutions, which is the FIOCRUZ plan, public policy of food security, what we did in the slums, in the favelas, our experience in food safety. And we think about sustainable, healthy territories, and to think also about surveillance, health surveillance, a reduction of vulnerabilities, namely in peripheral communities in the state of Rio de Janeiro. This is an initiative of interinstitutional articulation. I believe that this is very important to state and base this and highlight this at all moments. So all these institutions listed here, one notes from a bloc that is associated with scientific associations, the Brazilian Association of Collective Health, universities, the Federal University of Rio, of the state of Rio de Janeiro, the Catholic University, the city hall, the city council of the city of Rio de Janeiro, the Ministry of Health, and especially those based in the favelas, in the slums. What's the context of all this? Initially, and especially considering a context of greater vulnerability in slums, there's a group of civil society and institutions and organizations. They came up with a plan of fighting COVID-19 in the favelas. The inequalities in the periphery and in the favelas would facilitate the progression of the pandemic. Given greater population density or very frail sanitation systems. So this whole set of indicators that we identified and raised at the time enabled the preparation of a plan to face and deal with the pandemic in Rio de Janeiro's slums. I don't know whether everyone here knows, but approximately in Rio de Janeiro, the last data are from our census in 2010. In the city of Rio, 22% of the population live in slums. When we think of the state, this figure is of about 13% compared to the two census, 2000 and 2010. There was an advance, an increase in the number of people living in favelas. So we will probably get about 27, 28% of the population in the city of Rio de Janeiro live in the slums, in the favelas. Denise has already said 33 million Brazilians live in a situation of hunger. And the response of civil society were of the essence, namely in the slums in the city of Rio de Janeiro. Crisis groups and groups of solidarity, and I could list a series of experiences in this sense. With that realization, we understood that the best constitution, after a donation of the Rio de Janeiro City Council of 20 million reais, we should forward this resource to civil society so they could implement actions to mitigate the effect of the pandemic in the favelas. We made a public call, for bids. The project's coordinator is here, Leonidia. She is from the West region, an area in Rio de Janeiro that and is composed by many different neighborhoods. And they donated over 1 ton of food to these populations. Initiatives such as this one make up this group of actions. They were 8 program areas that range from observing all WHO actions and also in mental health and education and remote education. But most interestingly is that this amount of resources, we have already forwarded 6.4 million reais to civil society in 75 favelas in 8 cities in the state of Rio de Janeiro, and 80% of these funds was geared toward projects regarding nutritional and food safety. This is significant because civil society identified that the main demand to face the effects of the pandemic was to act directly on fighting hunger. Approximately in this period, in 1 year of actions, especially for actions within the favela, 150,000 people have benefit because that acts in reducing inequalities. with a focus on nutritional and food safety. As I pointed out, at this point, organizations in partnership with FIOCRUZ enabled the donation of 250 tons of food and another 45,000 meals from community kitchens. These 45,000 meals were distributed to families, and they reached almost 100,000 people. Uh, Data that is very significant in this is that 30% of people working in these projects really bet on agroecological partnerships, family farming, and in building community kitchens, solidarity kitchens, as a strategy to mitigate the pandemic's effects, in addition to community vegetable gardens in the favelas. They're not extremely new. When we see in the bibliography, in the literature, we know that there are community kitchens in the end of the 80s in Brazil, but they became especially significant as of 2018 and were expanded in the pandemic. In this strategy of solidarity kitchen, we FIOCRUZ helps and maintains 8 community kitchens in the state of Rio de Janeiro. We donated 300,000 reais, which is a very low figure when we think of the size of this kind of articulation. But this enabled that meals cost an average 6 reais and 64 cents. This is significant. The cost of a meal in the city of Rio de Janeiro in August is of 47 reais and 50 cents. The possibility of building community kitchens and this articulation with the public power and civil society enabled the production of meals at a much lower cost than the average of the cost of the meals in the city of Rio de Janeiro. Meals, these 30% of these meals are agroecological meals. And I'd like to close by pointing out some points that to me seem very important and relevant in this articulation. First of all, acknowledging this experience of partnership with civil society as an action that is closely linked to social technologies, health technologies, in order to reduce hunger and fighting poverty, namely in the slums. It is important to point out that the management and on-site shared among civil society and public institutions such as FIOCRUZ and different organizations or like public universities, the support of members of the City Council of Rio de Janeiro, enabled a new arrangement of articulation. And as a governance structure, for us to think about these processes of partnership and how to implement an articulation with civil society is essential as a methodology for governance methodology. And it's important to observe in these experiences how it was possible to reorganize production processes, betting on solidarity. Solidarity as a central brand for the creation of this public policy and a characteristic of innovating articulation among these different players. And it's important to point out the strategy of local governance as a possibility of thinking governance strategies associated to the expansion of community articulation.
We know that the biggest difficulty we have in participation globally is how we can involve and extend the community articulation. Perhaps the answer is to do it together with the civil society. And the previous panel is very relevant in that respect by donating and working collectively. And something else that is essential for us is how, through this initiative, we can articulate directly with the SDGs. Since the very first one, two, three, fighting hunger, including health and all the SDGs 10, 11, and 12 associated with reducing inequalities, the cities, and new production models, and especially number 17. SDG 17 is about partnership networks. I believe here we have a positive experience to be tapped on, which brings in a strong message saying that public institutions, civil society, governments, congressmen together can produce initiatives, quality initiatives, that will bring about more engagement at lower cost and also with less impact on society. We have here the QR code with more information, and let's go on talking.
Obrigado, Richard.
Thank you, Richels, for this very important contribution. Let's now go on to Leonardo. Thanking you for your participation representing the observatory at Bocaina. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. Hello. Thank you for staying, holding on strongly till the end. I'm the coordinator of governance and management at the Observatory of Healthy Sustainable Territories of Bocaina. Our observatory that we call OTSS is the institutional program of FIOCRUZ, and it's been built together with the traditional forum of communities of Angra dos Reis and Paratuba. And it is built in this partnership, and the group is shared between a FIOCRUZ staff and a representative of this forum. And we are including researchers from the academia and researchers from the community. And the structure is part of the territory, the demands that come out of the territory, and all constructs that come from the territory. It's a very broad area. It encompasses 140 traditional communities in 7 municipalities from the southern area of São Rio and north of São Paulo. It is quilombola communities and the coastal areas and indigenous communities. They are very vulnerable communities. It is on the border between the two largest cities in the country. And to complement the previous talk, that they are acting strongly in the urban environment, in the favelas, in the slums, and we work with the traditional communities in the rural environment, with a group of communities that are extremely vulnerable. On the other hand, they have organized themselves lately to try and claim their rights and fight for them, organizing themselves strongly in the Forum of Traditional Communities. When we built this partnership back in 2009, we strengthened a series of actions based on what the territory demanded. These communities depend basically on their territories to ensure their rights to maintaining their customs and their food security because they get out of the territory and the ancestral relationship with it, their own food security. So when they formed themselves as a forum, as a political movement, and the forum is a social political movement, they were formed basically with the purpose of ensuring the right to their territories. If you know the area, it's one of the most beautiful in the world, with the huge appeal for real estate developments. It is the target of large developers. The exploration of the pre-salt is there, In the area, we have two nuclear plants. The third is being built now. We also have a whole set of high level luxury condos. So the vector of capital attraction is huge, deterritorializing, forcing and making pressure towards displacement of these people. And that threatens their food security. It is in this context that this partnership with FIOCRUZ was formed to form the observatory. And it is in this context that the Forum of Traditional Communities established a series of agendas to fight for. In the dialogue with FIOCRUZ and in the maturing process of the political movement, the Forum realized that ensuring the right to the territory did not depend upon a direct fight for the territory, but rather the fight for the maintenance of their right to maintain their customs, their traditional customs. And for that, they needed to make pressure on politicians. So they established a series of political agendas. Amongst them, traditional tourism, where the traditional communities are the leaders, since the planning up to the delivery of these tourist services, fighting for social and environmental justice, and amongst all these rights they're claiming for, we have agroecology, agroecological production. In the observatory, we have a strong bias since we are a program that is a partnership between grassroots organizations and a research institute. We are building knowledge based on the ecology of knowledge, the dialogue amongst different types of knowledge in order to build a different type of knowledge. And that is very apparent in the agroecology of the territory. We're working on it as a set of actions and knowledges that joins the knowledge of from scientists and the traditional knowledge so as to build an agroecological structure that joins modern elements and traditional elements. That's at the root, and that's the baseline of my talk. Since then, we've implemented different actions in the territory. We implemented it. Initially, it was only Angra dos Reis, Paraty, and Ubatuba. More recently, after demands from the territory, demands for concrete projects, we extended it from Mangaratiba up to Ilhabela in São Paulo, in articulation with different movements that represent these traditional communities. In the observatory, we built the Social Technologies Incubator, and it tries to work strongly on the idea of agroecology based on the local actions. The incubator tries to understand and map actions in all areas: agroecology, community-based tourism, ecological sanitation, and small-scale fishing. It tries to consider different endeavors and initiatives, structuring them and strengthening them so that it may assure food sovereignty and income based on commercialization. We've been doing this in different areas, and we built our methodology together with the local communities. The incubator is not made up of experts only. We have several representatives from the three different native peoples, and they articulate with us, helping us build this process of incubators. Several of them involve agroecology. Agroecology is one of the main activities of our incubator because communities practice agriculture. They have been doing so for a long time. Since the very first public policies back in 2004 aimed at agroecology, In the debates, this issue was maturing. In mid 2000, these communities implemented this sort of project. Then the projects lost strength and power, and now the observatory, based on the incubator, has been promoting more and more this type of discussion with a revival of this topic based on the strengthening of communities' actions. I'm going to present 4 initiatives we've been acting on strongly, supporting agroecology and food sovereignty in the territory. So we have territorial agroecological plans. Here, together with the communities, we build plans that will enable agroecological production and marketing. Then we have the local traditional communities being included in the PNAE, the National Program for School Meals. Here, the government purchases produce to be included and used in the school meals. Traditional communities were kept apart from the process, and we included them in this discussion. Also, we organized during the pandemic a program serving more than 700 families, delivering several food baskets. And now we have been working with another area of FIOCRUZ and the vice presidency of FIOCRUZ to strengthen agroecology in the different territories. So basically, this territorialized agroecological plan is a methodology built to strengthen in the communities the idea of producing ecologically. It involves the communities. We involve communities in the discussion based on the form of traditional communities. Just to give you an idea, today in the observatory, we have 56, I believe, community researchers, if I'm not mistaken, 56. They're coming from these communities we're working with or the neighboring communities, which allows them to spread the knowledge. We've been mapping this through oral experiences and the different agroecological systems that are there and spread the agroecological systems. In doing so, we've been organizing better production. And it's been allowing us to market, be it through PNI or through agroecological fairs. We organized one in Paraty, there's another one in Caraguatatuba. So we've been building plans to strengthen agroecology in different communities. There's one in Campinho. And by the way, what's interesting is that we join different sectors of society. Some are fishermen from artisanal fishing, some are farmers. We're involving 70% of the community in Campinho, for instance. In another village, Itachi, and in the Quilombo da Fazenda, and in Almada Beach, we have a series of agroecological plans in action. So we have the plan design and then its implementation. Well, I've spoken about this already, so we always try to work with the 3 different peoples without privileging any of them. Panay is important. Based on the plans, we gained scale in production. Of course, these communities were already producing in the past, but we organized them, and in doing so, we helped them based on a research we implemented. That's our Achilles heel. How can you market? Could they market their production? They didn't know how to. So Panay was a way in which we organized everything for them, including the whole bureaucracy and the accounting. We have 14 families in the territory that are placing their products with BNI. Another recent program was the Cuidar é Resistir. Caring is resisting. As soon as the pandemic started, the traditional communities closed themselves to the world. Some of them did so on their own initiative. Several tourists wanted to come in, but the communities decided not to allow them to. They live off tourism, especially those on the beach, on the coast. But all the others, be it mass tourism or community-based tourism, and after the pandemic, they had a serious problem with food insecurity. So the forum, with the support of the observatory, organized itself and managed to raise donations and funds and started delivering information as well as basic food baskets, masks, always trying to inform them, saying this is not just donation, this is not just aid. We need to raise your awareness. We're only helping, we're only assisting because the government cannot reach you at this time. And the campaign was so successful because, on one hand, it strengthened the links between the forum and these areas. On the other hand, it raised their awareness, and also the forum, to a certain extent, prioritized the delivery and the inclusion of agroecological produce in the food baskets. So the communities, since they were closed, they started planting again. And they're still doing so even after the end of the pandemic. So halfway through, Petrobras came in with a significant resource, more than 2,700,000 reais, and we were doing something very humble for a set of 400 families. With these funds, we expanded the aid to 7,000 families, prioritizing the purchase of agroecological produce. And we had several good results, especially the motivation to go back to planting after. So there was a revival of farming in the area. Here we see the delivery of food by the community itself. And then there's another project, the project called ARA. It involves 3 sectors of FIOCRUZ. Here, through this project, we've been strengthening farming through agroecological territorialized plans by articulating agroecology and artisanal fishing. So if you go to a restaurant, you will eat the fish that was fished through artisanal fishery. So you articulate actions in the territory. So basically, that's it. Thank you so much.
Obrigado, Léo.
Thank you. I'm going to try to play my role as a moderator. So we start off from a very important concept of food safety and food sovereignty to our institution that is playing the role, an important role during the pandemic. We fought for life, and we played a very unique role. 2 clear examples that our public institution that is or has a classical, technical, scientific role and plays an important social, becomes a social actor with an important role in all these communities in a work of articulation
Consegue
and to work together and generate a set of important actions that will be an important legacy, not only for the present moment, but for the future, of significant learning points. Our time is we're way over our schedule, and I'd just like to thank once again for all of those who remained. On behalf of all of us here, we'd like to thank your attendance. But there is one question that remained. What do the cities, what do the governments, what can the rulers do with this? The name role of the forum is to discuss the strategies, that the challenges that are presented here, how to act. What can be the main action or the effect that these cities can think jointly of to be prepared to face this major issue that we face, hunger? So how do you see this? Are our examples, can they be reproduced? What else? How could you just make a brief comment and in 2 words, each one of you, what actions could we have, or the city could have in this contest? I think that what we do at a local level affects the global level. This is the main learning, the lesson I learned working in favelas, in slums, or in religious territories of African influence, indigenous communities, rural areas. This connectivity with nature, which agroecology teaches us always, is what is at stake. And we see its consequences if we have a perspective that I act here and what I do here, I may interfere in Africa or in Asia, anywhere in the world. I believe that if we bear this in mind, we may find alternatives. And some sessions that I listen into this afternoon attest to this, and we see and hear the experiences of other countries. But we have to bear this in mind and be aware of this, that wherever, regardless of where I am, I may have, my actions will have an influence elsewhere. I think there are 2 tracks here that are important. How FIOCRUZ faced and dealt with the pandemic in the favelas and the community responses to this pandemic. First of all, directly associated to the city is to understand the integration of rural and urban, field and city. We can't think of the city and the responses of the urban without taking into account this territorial network. And this is important for family farming or family agriculture and different integrality. And another line of thought is that when there is the integration of participation, we can see the community response to enhance and lead to collaboration networks between the stakeholders of how we, the pretty name we want to give to the process to articulate multiple stakeholders, institutional or social ones. And that is how we're going to effectively enable these more potent. And this, we brought a direct example here. When we bring everyone together, we are able to do more and at a lower cost, I believe. If we have to explain from a financial point of view, because numbers are important and money and what have you. And we can even impact the parliament. The first law in Brazil for a direct contribution of money to a favela. So we affected the favela, and the favela is affected too. So just bringing everybody together to think about collective actions and solutions. I'm going to try to be very brief. I won't repeat, but if I were to say two words are much too few. Two ideas. I'm not going to talk about only for Brazil. Rebuild public policies, rebuild for food security and food sovereignty. And the second idea is that within the building of public policies or reconstruction of public policies, communities, whether they be the favelas of African descent ancestry, or from their forming or formation or reformulation, as in our case. And the third idea, to do this, be able to do this within networks. I think these are three essential messages. If we do not rebuild the public policies, regardless of how strong the communities are, we won't be successful. Well, I'd like to thank Denise, Richards, Denado, and thank you all for having remained here, and all those that are still attending. On behalf of FIOCRUZ, I'd like to thank you all. Thank the City Hall, the events organizers for the opportunity to share how we built this and the event in the past few days, Talita and Camila and Carolina, and the opportunity to bring to you our very simple and humble contribution. I'd like to thank you all. Good evening, and I hope you all go home safely. And please visit and make the most of Rio de Janeiro. It's a beautiful city, and there's a lot to see. Thank you very much.